Hello and good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar by the Bhopal Medical Appeal. My name is Tim Edwards. It's been my honour to have been involved with the medical appeal as a volunteer and as a trustee and as a manager for over 25 years now. I just wanted to mention some housekeeping before we begin. The cameras and microphones of participants and attendees will be muted throughout the event. The chat function has been disabled. There will be a Q&A at the end, and questions can be asked by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and typing a question. Please remember to make it clear if you would like your question to be directed at a particular panelist. Captions can be enabled or disabled by using the captions button at the bottom of the screen. And also, if you would like to communicate directly with the moderators of the webinar, please use the raise hand button on the panel below. Thank you. 40 years after that night, which, as Bhopal Medical Appeal co-founder Indra Sinha wrote, nobody wants to remember, but nobody can forget. Bhopal remains an open wound, untreated and unhealed. The survivors have spent much of the last month finding new ways to describe their ongoing struggle, expressing universal lessons they've learned along the rutted, twisting way, and launching new efforts to try to bring accountability to bear upon those with a duty of care towards them. It began with a collaboration with local artists, who over a number of days created powerful murals painted directly onto the walls of Carbide's decaying factory, just across the road from the colony of JP Nagar, which was the first community in December 1984 to be blanketed by MIC gas. It continued with an information campaign, a series of posters that formed a tunnel whose opening aligned precisely with a direct view of the rusting vent pipe from which the gas gushed 40 years ago. A new petition was filed in India's Supreme Court seeking additional compensation for sufferers of cancer and liver disease resulting from gas exposure, of whom more than 9 in 10 of several thousand were nevertheless categorized as having been only temporarily injured, leading to a one-off compensation payment originally of around £380 each. On Sunday, the children of Chingari held a candlelit vigil in tribute to those who had passed due to the disaster. And on Monday, the Sambhavna Clinic held a press conference to present analysis of clinical data of 16,305 gas-exposed and 8,106 unexposed patients. Dr. Usha Arya said that respiratory illnesses and mental health disorders remained significantly higher throughout the last 16 years, and depression was 2.7 times more prevalent among the gas-exposed. Conditions like diabetes and hypertension, which are not ordinarily associated with gas exposure, were consistently and significantly elevated. Over the last few days, the survivors have undertaken a traditional torch-lit march to the statue of a mother and child sculpted by the late Ruth Waterman, which is still the only existing memorial to the world's worst industrial disaster. And they also undertook a powerful daytime march through the streets of Bhopal just yesterday, accompanied by a towering obelisk festooned with familiar logos representing a litany of corporate crimes, of which Bhopal is just one example. One of the banners that was carried simply stated, "The Bhopal disaster is corporate crime, so are industrial pollution and climate change." As one organizational leader put it, had the poison in Bhopal spread due to an act of God, international agencies such as the World Health Organization would have set up specialized healthcare and long-term research centers to provide relief. And the picture after 40 years would have been very different. But it's clear that international relief agencies also treat victims of corporate crime in the same manner as corporations and governments, as expendable people. The survivors have partly at least been heard. Over the last few days, significant voices have joined with theirs to highlight the ongoing disaster, and I'll try to elaborate on this shortly. Within a statement published on December the 1st, Amnesty International said, "The survivor groups and their supporters continue to put up a truly inspirational fight for justice through legal actions, scientific research, and medical assistance in the absence of sufficient state and corporate support. Their story of grit and resilience is one to learn from, to honour, and to remember on this anniversary." And that's exactly what we hope to achieve by this webinar. The webinar's title, which encapsulates the resilience, tenacity, and spirit of the Bhopal survivors, derives from words written by turn of the 20th century preacher William Watkinson, a quote which is sometimes wrongly attributed to Confucius or to Eleanor Roosevelt. And the quote is, "It is far better to light the candle than to curse the darkness." It's my deep privilege today to be joined by Tahira Sultan, who is known by family and friends also as Ruby. Tahira has a PhD in biotechnology and works at the Department of Ophthalmology in the College of Medicine at King Saud University in Riyadh. We're also joined by Savraj Kaur, who is an award-winning humanitarian leader, sometime Bhopal Medical Appeal volunteer, and now the author of a beautiful new book focusing on 40 Bhopal children. Ruby, I'd like to speak with you first, if I may. Could you unmute, please? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Ruby, you were, it's extraordinary to think you were 3 years old in December 1984 when Carbide's factory released gas into your city. And I wonder if you could please just describe your experiences of that night to start us off.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks for inviting me to this webinar. And yeah, it's like it's 40 years back, but I feel it's yesterday night, and it's the same like it's December, and that night also it was a cold Sunday night. And me and my family was sleeping, and that time we live with our grandparents in a one house. It's a big house with my uncle family and my grandmothers and grandfather and cousin. So it's a big family. And after midnight, suddenly I woke up and feeling a burning sensation in my eyes. And my mother told me to get up quickly because we had to leave the house. I don't understand what's happening it's this time and what's going on. Why my mother, she is saying that wake up this time. And in the background, I could hear my grandmother, she is crying and screaming. And my father said that we need to reach Hamidia Hospital. It's a government hospital. Still, it's in Bhopal. And as soon as possible, we want to go and we want to reach in Hamidia Hospital. So this is the situation in my house. But now I feel this is the situation in every house that time of my area. And when we step outside, the air felt thick and smoky, and it hurt our eyes, and every breath felt like we were inhaling sharp needles. But I didn't realize that what's going on. I realized something wrong, which nobody understand. My mother quickly wrapped my 4-month old brother in a blanket and told me orderly. She, like, when you are a mother, you order to your kids how she react like me. She said that hold my kurta. Kurta is a kind of top dress usually Indian women wear, and whatever happened, beta, don't let it go, okay? So she said orderly. So then I feel that okay, I will, whatever it's going to happen, I will hold my mother kurta. And the street were chaotic, people were dazed and confused, no one know where we go. everyone is running, but there is no uh, path. With red eyes and hoarse voices from calling for help. And it felt like a war zone. Seriously, it's feel like uh, somebody attack in Bhopal and nobody know where we go. And because of the physical condition and symptoms, people feel that maybe hospital will help them. So most of the people, they are rushed to run to the hospital. And then I saw my grandmother fainting and my mother starting to vomit. My uncle spotted an auto rickshaw, big rickshaw, and he shouted that for everyone to get in. My father and grandfather tried to make us squeeze in, but it's was too heavy and the auto wouldn't move. After a little while, we had to get out and keep running. Now that time we miss everyone. I was still holding my mother's kurta, but suddenly I noticed that I couldn't see the rest of my family, my father and my grandmother. Then my mother told me to keep going to the hospital. Maybe in the hospital, I hope I can find your father and grandmother. At that moment, I felt something very, very, very strange. And I scared that time. I thought, what, why we are running and why everybody is shouting. And I knew that I had to hold on her kurta tightly. If I lose, maybe I get lost from my mother. So it's, many things in my mind at that time. And then I didn't let go of my mother's kurta as we run all night, and her clothes were covered with vomit and blood. That time I can smell the blood and vomit thing. And after a few hours, we stopped and rest. My mother, she cannot move further. She said that I'm exhausted and it's very hard to move, because now I can understand why she's saying that time she was pregnant, third child, and it uh, finish. And then we said, my mother said that okay, we will keep rest here and hope somebody will help us to reach hospital. And after a few hours, some ladies came and they took us and their home, and they gave some uh, clothes and coffee. And next morning they said that we will send you, we will try to return you back your home. When we are going our home, there was announcement from the government side. It said that there was a gas leak from the Union Carbide, and everybody is safe now. Now stay your home, and there is no problem now. Everything is under control, which is still we are facing after 40 years the same things. Nothing is in under control. Then my father saw us alive. He hugged all of three of us tightly and started to cry. And he told that I, you are alive. I'm searching for us like a mad person for last night. Where are you? Then my mother told to my father that we are near the bridge of uh, near. It's far from the Hamidia hospital. And that day, people talk about the chaos of that terrible night. The hospital were filled with many injured victims, and the atmosphere was filled with fear and confusion because no one knows what's going on. The gas is leaked, but what gas is leaked? What the harm effect of on the people? No one know anything about the gas leak, and doctors and nurses struggled to help everyone. But many victims were in critical condition. The medical staff had no experience dealing with the toxic exposure. This is the first time the Bhopal people know that what is this kind of gas. Even the local hospital, what I mentioned, the Hamidia hospital, it's only 3 kilometers far away from the Union Carbide, and it wasn't prepared for the crisis. The doctor did not know how to treat patient with methyl isocyanate poisoning, and they did not receive any information about the gas until day later. As a result, the medical care focused mostly on managing symptoms. Like, I mean, if the patient is coughing or feeling have a breathing problem, so they give the temporary treatment. And the actual poisoning, what the impact on the body, human body, nobody knows that. So this is the very serious situation in the hospital, as well as in the area of affected area. And no one know what is the treatment. Especially my aunt said that time that the coroner office struggled to issue death certificate for many victims, making it difficult to properly handle the bodies, and many were buried or submitted with official registration. And for medical care, several volunteer organizations stepped in and set up the temporary clinic in front of our house, and they provide temporary health care and food or water and medicine supplies. So that is the night, and after that day happened.
Thank
It's
you so
still
much.
in my memory.
Thank you so much, Ruby. You speak so vividly of your memories, which it's extraordinary to think how young you were, that you remember things so clearly as well. I mean, I certainly can't remember anything really from being that age. It's an incredibly chilling and powerful recollection that you have. Thank you. I just wanted to ask you, you've already prefigured this in some ways. You talked about the inability of the healthcare system to really come to terms with what they were facing and to start to develop protocols for better treatment. I just wondered if you could say a little bit about what your experience of growing up in Bhopal was after those events. Did you see changes happening? Did things get better for the survivors as you got older? What are your memories of that period?
See, the Bhopal gas tragedy has left us with profound lessons that remain relevant today. And I feel that there are two or three important things which uh, it's change, or it should be changed. I mean, first is the need for strong safety and regulation. First of all, if the disaster underscored the critical needs to strict safety and regulation in the industries, particularly those managing hazardous chemical or material. The poor safety practices at the Union Carbide plant resulted in catastrophic consequences. And this is highlight to how essential it is to have robust regulatory frameworks to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This is the first point what I feel. And the second is health and emotional support. Many survivors continue to deal with long-term health issue and emotional trauma from the tragedy. This experience emphasized the importance of providing ongoing health monitoring and mental health support for affected individuals. Community care play a vital role in helping survivors recover and rebuild their lives. And the third, very important, which I also have a participate in that, the community activism and corporate accountability. In the wake of the disaster, survivor and local communities emerged as strong advocates for justice, raising awareness about their ongoing struggle. Their grassroots movement demonstrated the power of collective action and community support. The tragedy also highlighted the necessity for corporations to take responsibility for their operations and their impact on public health and safety, which is very important. Company like any company, if it is Dow or any Union Carbide or any chemical company, companies must prioritize the well-being of the communities they operate in over profit. I mean, these are lessons remind me the importance in, which is safety, support, and accountability to ensure that such kind of tragedy does not happen again. Same like as Bhopal.
And the lessons that you're describing, they seem to me common sense and also human focus, which is what anyone should be in the face of, potential suffering and real suffering.
Yes.
Just wondered, Ruby, if you could say a few words about any inspiration you might have taken from such a terrible situation that you and your family have lived through. Is there anything or anyone who has inspired you to become the person you are today and to think the way in which you do now?
Yes. Uh, Despite the pain and hardship we faced after the Bhopal gas tragedy, the survivors have shown amazing strength, seriously, and their courage, their determination to share their stories like in front of anyone. They are most welcome to many peoples and they seek justice and better healthcare, bring hope to future generation who may face similar challenges. These survivors inspire me to work for a safer and kinder world, making such sure a tragedy never happen again. Companies may forget the damage they cause, but the people affected will never forget it, like Bhopal people. Like, for example, my mother. The gas tragedy took away her third child, then her husband, her mother, leaving her with deep sorrow. Yet she never gave up. Instead, she dedicated her life to help struggles. There are so many women who they don't have family, they don't have proper house, they don't have next food for the next day. They don't have any children. They are still struggling, and she afford to support and comfort to those who were also suffering from their losses. So she is my inspiration, and her journey reminds me that even in the toughest time, healing and hope are possible. She turned her pain into a purpose, showing how love and kindness can overcome tragedy. Her commitment to helping others inspire me to keep fighting for justice, better healthcare, and support for all survivors. Together, I feel we can build a strong community that remember everyone affected and works toward a safer and better world for all of us.
Wow, thank you, Ruby. And I just wanted to add, I wanted to name your mother, if that's okay. I mean, your mother is it's called Aziza Sultan. I've had
Yes.
the honor of calling her a friend for a number of years. I think, am I right in saying that she is the longest serving employee of the Sambhavna Clinic in Bhopal?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
there are maybe one or two other members of staff that have been there for as long as she has. I think she was hired
Yes.
the
Yes.
initial hiring in 1996 or 97.
Yes, and now she is going to next year retire, but she don't want. She don't want to retire. She don't want to.
I mean,
She don't want.
she's a force of nature, your mother. She's quite
Yes,
extraordinary in the genuine sense.
yes,
And she has worked as a
yes,
community health worker, and she's worked on women's health.
yes,
She's
yes,
looked out for women with cervical and polycystic fibrosis problems,
yes, yes,
menstrual
yes,
problems, and she's effectively become a trained gynecologist, I think, through the
yes,
work she
yes.
does.
What she is doing in the Sambhavna clinic in Bhopal, no doctor and no clinic providing such kind of treatment and diagnosis in the Bhopal for the woman.
Yeah,
No one.
yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Ruby. I think we'll get a chance to speak with you again through the Q&A. I hope so.
Okay.
I'm going to say a few words now about what's been happening in the last few weeks and what it really speaks to in terms of the survivors movement that Ruby just articulated so movingly. Um, As I mentioned earlier, over the last few days, significant international voices have spoken up on Bhopal just in the last few days. And it began with Amnesty International on Sunday. And they said for the past 4 decades, a woefully inadequate and callous response towards the victims and survivors of the Bhopal gas tragedy has been enabled by environmental racism. And I think this is the first time that a major international organization has called out what has happened in Bhopal as an instance of racism. Mark Dummett, Amnesty International's head of business and human rights, goes on to say that little has changed in the past 40 years. Unequal power dynamics have ensured that justice is denied to the victims, who predominantly belong to low-income, marginalized and minority communities. Meanwhile, those responsible, especially giant US-based companies, shamefully continue to evade their clear human rights responsibilities. The Indian and US authorities' failure to hold to account all those responsible for this outrageous crime of corporate negligence is a travesty. And it's so reassuring to have a respected international organization saying exactly the same things that survivors have been saying themselves for so many years. On Monday, the special procedures of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and I just wanted to point out here that Ruby spoke in front of human rights observers at the United Nations in Geneva last week and spoke incredibly powerfully, and nobody was left unmoved in the room. And so a few days later, we find this statement. So the Special Procedures of the United Nations Human Rights Council is the largest body of independent experts in the United Nations human rights system. And they published a very powerful statement declaring that the hazardous waste that still affects residents in and around Union Carbide's factory should not be seen as an issue of the past. They said, for over a decade, the Indian company controlled by Union Carbide Corporation, which is now owned by the Dow Chemical Company, dumped and mismanaged hazardous substances and wastes in its pesticides factory in Bhopal. This has created a sacrifice zone where the pollution from the contaminated site continues to poison people, many living in poverty. The contamination has affected soils and the drinking water supplies of an estimated 200,000 people in 71 colonies in Madhya Pradesh state. Victims still struggle for cleanup, compensation, and adequate medical care. The UN group then states there to be an urgent need for prompt and tangible action by India, by the United States, and by Dow Chemicals to address the legacy of contamination and injustice in Bhopal. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that the United Nations has called out India and the United States government for their inaction on Bhopal. Yesterday, the day after this statement, members of the United States Congress and Senate joined the clamor for remedy, introducing a resolution into the US Senate calling for December the 3rd to be designated a National Day of Chemical Disaster Awareness. The announcement included the following words by Representative Rashida Tlaib. From Detroit to Bhopal, we have the right to breathe clean air. It's been 40 years since the Bhopal chemical disaster, and the survivors are still sick and waiting for justice. Dow must pay what's owed to the people of Bhopal. So now you have US lawmakers calling out the company as well. It ends with a statement by Rachna Dhingra of the Bhopal Justice Campaign. Bhopal survivors who continue to live with sickness, intergenerational harms, poisoned water, and gross injustice hold as their dearest hope that no other community anywhere in the world should suffer as they have or as they still do. By designating December the 3rd as the National Chemical Disaster Awareness Day, the US Congress sends a powerful message to Union Carbide, to Dow, and to other chemical manufacturers inclined to cut corners and to socialize costs. We will remember, and you will be held accountable. I recently heard the author of Amnesty's 40-year report speak at an event, and she was emphatic in saying that there was not a single positive change in the long history of Bhopal that has not come about as a result of the actions and campaigns of the Bhopal survivors. And I'll try to briefly outline what she meant. Survivor organizations have generally followed a policy of by all means necessary. Protests have included dozens of hunger strikes, including the waterless kind, hundreds of rallies, 3 500-mile marches from Bhopal to New Delhi, multiple occupations of officers, including those of state officials and Dow Chemicals India headquarters in Mumbai, many mass die-ins, including one in the busiest street crossing in Delhi, and incidentally, following suit, the Bhopal Medical Appeal 12 years ago, along with our supporters, organised a mass die-in at the 2012 Olympics, and it was the only protest of the entire Games, and it was to protest Dow Chemical's sponsorship of the London Olympics. There have also been die-ins at the offices of the Indian Prime Minister, where a number of women and children chained themselves to perimeter fencing before being arrested. Survivor groups have also provided legal support in civil, criminal, and environmental cases beginning in the 1980s and continuing to this day. Scientific support to a variety of investigations, technical support concerning the factors behind the disaster, and social and medical support beginning in 1985, when a number of survivors and doctors broke down a gate and occupied an area of land within the factory site, quickly building a makeshift clinic from which the detoxification treatment sodium thiosulfate was given to hundreds of people before the clinic was raided and broken down by police. On the first march to Delhi, which was in large part led by Rashida B and Champa Devi, the founders of the Chingari Trust, 100 women, 25 children, and 10 men set out on foot, penniless but resolute. Their march was fraught with challenges. They were warned that they would never make it to Delhi, that dacoits would, in the Chambal area, notorious for bandits, would rob and kill them. But when they reached the Chambal Valley, the bandits met them and said, "It's a shame our sisters have to march to Delhi because the government here won't listen." Instead of robbing and harming, they offered milk, sweets, 400 rupees for food, and even escorted them safely to the Chambal Bridge. Some of the main victories of the long struggle of the survivors are official revoking of the criminal immunity that was granted to Union Carbide by the 1989 out-of-court civil settlement that did not consult a single survivor, successfully claiming of the right to interest accrued on compensation amounts for each claimant, and that was paid out in 2004. Bhopal survivors' right to health care judicially acknowledged to be a fundamental constitutional right, leading to the formation of a court-appointed monitoring committee, which even now continues to observe and recommend on healthcare provisions, forcing the Indian government to seek Warren Anderson's extradition, prompting a judicial summons that was issued against Dow Chemical in 2004-05, and which has only just resulted in Dow Chemical attending court in Bhopal just in the last 18 months. Provision of clean drinking water to 20,000 families residing in areas affected by contaminated groundwater after a campaign that went on for more than a dozen years against the state authorities to ensure that provision of water. Judicial acceptance of barefoot monitoring of the spread of contamination, and making it difficult, if not impossible, for a long time for Dow Chemical to expand its business into India. And all of this is before we begin to talk about the innovative medical work of the Sambhavna Trust in Bhopal, which has benefited over 35,000 desperately ill survivors, and which was co-founded and grown through the support of thousands of ordinary people, mainly in the UK, but also from around the world. Or the work of the Chingari Trust, whose work we will learn more about now from Savraj. Savraj has spent a number of the last years working on what's an incredible book, which focuses on and features 40 children who are regular attendees at the Chingari Trust's Rehabilitation Centre. And Savraj chose to focus on the children and really to sort of investigate their dreams and their lives as told by them. Savraj, could I ask you to come back in, please? Your camera is off at the moment, I think.
Sorry about that.
Lovely,
Hello,
there you are.
I'm here. Hi,
Um,
thank you, Tim. Yeah.
You're welcome. Savraj, I remember well that you first got involved in Bhopal on an active basis about 10 years ago, and you did about 6 months voluntary work with the medical appeal. Can you say a little bit about why you kept engaged with the city and the work that was being done there?
Yeah, so I'm a bit about me. I'm London born, Indian origin, and my passion has always been human rights. So when I heard about Bhopal, it was natural for me to be drawn to the cause and the fight that's still going on. Um, and at university, I studied disasters and loved reading and happened to read Animals, People at the same time. So it was all coming together at the right time, and the 30 years was approaching. So but Bhopal was always at the forefront of my mind. I think we covered it for about 10 minutes in class at university, but I kept going back to that page and knowing that this isn't the end for me. So yeah, so I reached out to volunteer, and the Bhopal Medical Appeal was a special charity to me. It was a really humble office in Brighton doing huge things, and so I was drawn to that initially, but also the approach to the grassroots action, not just campaigning, but campaigning using local people's knowledge and their expertise. Um, and then, once I got to Bhopal to volunteer on the 30th anniversary, I stayed at the Sambhavana clinics, one of their little rooms. And in the morning, I'd just be amazed. I'd go downstairs and go for a walk, and there was a medicinal herb garden where, they'd complement that with Western medicine to help alleviate people of their symptoms. And I thought that was really, that was really respectful, and uh, I guess it was progressive at the same time as using ancient knowledge. So I thought that just, it said a lot to me, and I haven't really stopped following the charity since. So yeah, it was like an oasis that you created. And then when I went to the Chingari Trust, it was a space where lots of children were receiving therapy, learning, playing, and that never left me either. So when I left Bhopal, I think at the time I was working on media coverage. When I left Bhopal, I'd a huge understanding of what the press like to do and what is really going on. But yeah, what I didn't know is that I'd leave with friends. I'd come back many more times, and that I'd be writing a book after all these years. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you say where this specific idea for a book about the Chingari children came from? How was that generated?
Yeah, so it wasn't my idea. It was a lovely lady called Anne Palmer. She runs a charity called Bhopal Todays and Tomorrows, and she's very dedicated campaigner who visited Chingari, and the one question that she asked, I think it was the general manager at the time, when leaving, she was overwhelmed, and she said, "What can we do? We're going back. We're going to leave this city. What can we do?" And the manager responded, "Just tell people about us." So Anne had the idea to write a book and didn't want to do it alone. And so we somehow connected, and yeah, so that's how the book came about. Unfortunately, she fell ill um, partway through it, and she said, would you mind carrying on? So that's what I did. Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if you could say something about, I mean, writing a book seems like a huge challenge to me, where does one begin? And I do understand that you would have faced some obstacles in the development of the book. So I just wonder if you could speak about what kept you motivated and, during the course of writing the book, whether there were specific children that really inspired you to keep going.
Yeah. So a bit more about the book. So generally, like, when a disaster happens or someone reports on a tragic event in the world, you see certain images, and they're focused around vulnerability, trauma, and they're really stark images, often black and white, to portray how terrible the situation is. And these are important, because they pull at the heartstrings. But in doing so, sometimes we lose sight of who the people are themselves and the rest of their lives. So that's the approach I wanted to take. These are children we're talking about. I wanted to show their childlike qualities, and their children are children. They play, they dream. They're really, really good at doing all those things. So I really wanted to drill down. These are really individual people who have these wonderful thoughts of their own, at the same time balancing it with those stark facts about the reality that they have to live in and why. So that's why when you see the design of the book, it's colorful, it's a bit playful. I think one person saw it and said, "Is it a children's book?" It's not a children's book. It could be for a child, maybe it's maybe 8+ or something, but I wanted it to be something that they would be happy to be seen in as well. So to hold in their hands and to be proud to take it and show people. So that was what kept me going, is like making sure that they had something that they could take away and be proud of. Yeah, so obviously the distance is really, it was the biggest challenge. If I was closer to Bhopal every day, I could have, done everything a lot quicker. In the middle of the whole thing, I had a baby. So I was burning the midnight oil. I just remember like having a baby and then a cushion and my laptop. So it wasn't easy. And he's still not a good sleeper. So yeah, so I was a new mother, but when we happened to have family in Delhi, so I'd go over to Bhopal every time we did a trip. And it was just a different experience, as a mother of a young child, surrounded by other mothers or carers or even dads wanting the best for our children. It was just a nice feeling. There was that kind of kinship. And then in Chingari, I think at one point I had a 9-year-old baby with me, and I was trying to do interviews, and the caretaker Nafisa, I don't know if you know her, but she just scoop him up and look after him, and it was really helpful. And they enabled this just as much as I have. So it was a really, really nice place to go. So yeah, even now as I wrap up, there's all these things that I wish I could have done, but I think I think we're ready to tell their stories, and I hope people will be just learn something and feel motivated to support Chingari through BMA as well.
Thank you so much, Savraj. It's absolutely wonderful what you've done. We will give people information about where they can buy the book at the end of this webinar. Before we get to that, I'd like to invite questions from the audience for the panelists as a whole, or for particular speakers, whatever you prefer. But we'd be delighted to answer any questions you might want to put forward. Just to remind you, you can, I have to go back to housekeeping. I can't remember exactly how you submit the questions now. Yes, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so you could submit any questions through there. Okay. So we have the first question that came through is for me, and it's about uni carbide and Dow, and why they've been able to avoid responsibility. That's a pretty huge question. I'll try and address it as simply as I can. Essentially, as a multi-billion-dollar corporation, they were able to bring huge resources to bear on attempting to evade liability. And the first evidence of their intent really started to manifest in the first few days when an initial sort of human response came from a medical expert that worked at a West Virginia plant for Union Carbide, where he sent advice to Bhopal that in cases of suspected cyanide poisoning, treat the victims with sodium thiosulfate. He then retracted that advice and made an excuse that he couldn't be expected to know what kind of gas had leaked. And he was taken to Bhopal by the company. And while flanked by lawyers at a press conference, he basically said that it would be bad to use sodium thiosulfate. People shouldn't do it. And began that process of really glossing over the medical impact, because by that time it seemed the lawyers had gotten involved, and the company's objective was really to find ways to minimize liability. And if sodium thiosulfate had been successful and clinical double-blind trials established that it was, it would have established that toxins from gas exposure had crossed the pulmonary barrier, got into the bloodstream, and potentially affected other parts of the body apart from the surface of the lungs and eyes. And the company was at pains to argue that that was the problem. The company also hired a notorious PR company called Burson Marsteller in the first few days, who were tasked with the simple objective of getting the Bhopal disaster off the front pages of the world's press. They also hired an operation called Kissinger Associates that was set up by former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to work at the highest levels of the US government to lobby sitting ministers of state and presidents on various issues. Anyway, I could go on, but yeah, the company also ended up playing the legal systems of two countries in order to avoid liability in either. And it used every trick in the book, and that's a direct quote from the author of the Amnesty 40-year report. It effectively left no stone unturned in terms of avoiding its liability, and it has enjoyed the protection of the US government through a major part of this process. So, for example, during the time that Dow Chemical was being summoned, more recently, this happened between 2014 and 2023, Dow Chemical was the subject of 6 separate summonses sent from the court in Bhopal via the Indian government. And the US government, that was obliged under a treaty that fell under international law, was obliged to act on the service of summons and send the paperwork to Dow, Michigan, just steadfastly didn't do anything about it, completely ignored the request from its sovereign partner, and effectively acted in breach of international law to do so. Why was that going on? Well, at the same time, Dow Chemical CEO Andrew Liveris was one of the most frequent CEO visitors to President Obama's White House. White House records showed that he was a visitor on 50 to 60 separate occasions across 3 or 4 years. So, you know, we don't have direct evidence that he was influencing Department of Justice policy, but I think it's reasonable to conclude that it might have come up in discussions, especially when Mr. Liveris was head of a business organization in 2010, when there was a huge furore in India around Bhopal. And he decided, we found out through rights information, not to go to India because he feared arrest if he landed in the country. And President Obama was going there at the same time and effectively being instructed not to talk about Bhopal. So there was certainly collusion between the US government and the company to protect it. Anyway, I will cut off there because I could go on forever about it. The next question comes about the British government. Has any British government helped? It's an excellent question. I think I'm not aware of there being any overt help from any prior British government. There has been a number of MPs that have expressed solidarity and verbal support in the past. So over the years, we've introduced a number of early day motions into Parliament to try and attract the support of MPs. And I think the most successful one of those attracted almost 100 signatures. So actually, it was over 100 signatures. It was a really large chunk of sitting members of parliament at that time. We don't know whether that's gone any further, whether there's been any discussion at a bilateral level between the UK and the Indian government. But I do know that when there was a debate, a Westminster debate a couple of years ago, involving several sitting MPs on Bhopal, that US politicians sat up and took notice of the fact that they were being called out by lawmakers in another country. And that fed into an action that happened last year when 12 members of Congress wrote to the US Deputy Attorney General in order to demand answers as to why the Department of Justice hadn't been serving summons on Dow. And as soon as they started asking questions, the summons was served, and that forced Dow to attend court in Bhopal for the first time last year. The next question. What hope do we have when governments back up the perpetrators? Chernobyl happened a few years later. Again, an excellent question. There seems to be plenty of evidence that there seems to be plenty of evidence that the Indian government came under enormous pressure over the years from US authorities over its pursuit of the foreign accused in the case. So we had a situation where there's a sort of asymmetry of power between the company and its allies in one major government and the global South country in which it has created this awful problem. I think the hope lies in people and in people's responses. I think we know that the company was very shaken at the campaign that happened in the UK, for example, in 2012. It affected their share price. They had investment bodies and analysts calling them out, telling them they had to take responsibility. So the financial community was starting to really speak up and challenge Dow at that time. Unfortunately, we weren't able to sustain that sort of pressure. I think if we had been, we might have already seen some significant shifts in position. And I think once civil society organizations in different parts of the world start to speak up, then the company feels the heat, and also that their parties colluding with them in government. Sorry, I'm finding myself answering all of the questions, but a lot of them seem to be quite specific to the medical appeal and to the UK. Somebody's asking if the medical appeal has faced any backlash or issues from Dow. It was in 2012 when we were campaigning around the Dow's Olympic involvement that it came to light through WikiLeaks that Dow had hired a company known for corporate espionage that had been monitoring the activities of the charity. In fact, we published an ad at the time that was quite successful, calling this out, but in a very light-hearted way, because the sorts of things that the corporate espionage company were reporting on was tweets and reading groups getting together to read Animals People, and the comments they'd had about the book. And there was they had gathered intelligence to monitor and to potentially suppress their there's a question here for Savraj. I'm going to jump to that because I realize I'm doing all the talking here, and it's about your future expectations for the Chingari Rehabilitation Centre, Savraj, about how you see things going in the future, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked Rashida B, one of the founders, this question a few weeks ago. I said, obviously it's 40 years, they're really tired. They were saying, what's going to happen on a grand scale? Do we need new leaders? But practically, what the centre needs is more funding and more space, because there's a huge waiting list. I think the waiting list is 4 times, their current capacity. So there are 300 children at present and 1,300 on the waiting list, if I'm not mistaken. And that's just registered people on the waiting list. So outside of that, there could be hundreds and hundreds more. And like I said, from the point of view of a parent, every child deserves the care, the right treatment. There are children going in who are unable to stand up at the age of 5 and who, months later can stand up, like some of the kids in the book I write about. And it's so limited, the number they can help. So if there was some way for them to grow in the near future and serve more children, that would be great. I mean, at the moment, they're just still an example of what a government should be doing, or others should be doing. But that's my kind of near future expectation of what can be done. And their work is so wonderful. I feel like, I mean, everyone knows the name Great Ormond Street, or, there's some brilliant children's hospitals and schools and centers out there. And I feel like Chingari, if that was a name where, anywhere in the world you hear it and you know what they're doing, that would also be a really great thing. So more people should be sharing, what is Chingari? What does it mean? What are they doing? What's the significance? And it's really, they're really leading from the front and from nothing. So yeah, more recognition will also mean more support for the children. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Somebody has also asked, mentioned that it's become difficult to find anything in print via libraries, etc. On Bhopal. Do members of the panel feel the incident has been buried somehow? Ruby, would you like to respond to that?
Repeat the question, Tim.
The question is about the difficulty in finding reading material about Bhopal, and really the question poses the question, do members of the panel feel that the incident has been buried in some way, that it's become so difficult to find information about Bhopal?
Yes, it's very difficult. I mean, there are no such specific scientific documents, and there are no such stories of the survivors in any library. Right now, if you go, I think most of the material you can find in Sambhavna library, because in Sambhavna they also have library and they collect all those documents which is related to the survivors and their stories, and they also do the research work. So most of the research are available in either the journal websites. It's a database. It's not the experimental base. So you can find the database information in that platform. But for the experimental and with the story wise and what the current situation they are facing, you cannot find any document in anywhere. So this is also a very bad situation, because no one it's working on this part. If you have literature, if you have document, you have to say the evidence what the people are facing in the last year and in the future. But here there is no evidence as a literature or as a document. So when suppose like I want to do something as an experiment or in the clinical level, so I will start from the starting. Not I don't have any literature. I have some reviews in PubMed or any scientific journal, but it's only theoretical, which I can find in any website or any internet search engine.
Thank you, Ruby. I'm sorry if I don't answer all the questions, by the way, because I'm conscious that we're running out of time, and it's very late for you now, Ruby, as well in Riyadh. Somebody's asking if the Bhopal Medical Appeal will try to re-establish the Bhopal Memorial Museum that recently shut down. Again, we have a problem with its ability to receive funds from overseas. It does not have FCRA permission, but there is a local effort to re-establish that museum, which I'm aware of. And I think the hope was to try and get it working, running again by the 40th anniversary. I'm not sure where they are with that, but I do know that it has been a focus to try and get the museum revived. Finally, there's one specific question for you, Ruby, as well. It talks about how the Bhopal survivors are known for their resilience. Do you personally believe that justice will ever be served in this case?
While the journey towards justice for Bhopal survivors is fraught with challenges, their resilience and advocacy keep the pursuit of justice alive. Whether justice will ultimately be achieved remain uncertain, but the collective efforts of survivor groups, along with supportive network, continue to keep the issue at the forefront of public consciousness. True justice would require acknowledgement of the past, adequate compensation, systematic changes to prevent future disaster, and robust health support for the affected communities, not with the gas survivors, as well as those who are still live in the contaminated area in the near the Union Carbide. So I think this is.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think we can take from the survivor groups themselves that there is always hope, because they certainly
Yes.
keep fighting. I think I'm going to quote Indra again, but there was a line that always stands out for me in Animals People, and it's when one of the characters says, "Let go of hope and keep on fighting." That's the lesson of Bhopal. And that's the lesson we've seen time and again in terms of the survivors. Okay, I'd just like to round up and thank so much Ruby and Savraj for your contributions this evening. I wanted to, I'm going to do a screen share, which I've never done before, if I can see the button. It seems to have disappeared actually from the, oh yeah, there it is. It got replaced, but I just wanted to share some images of Savraj's book and allow her to explain where it can be purchased. So here we go. Let me know if this doesn't work. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, so we're currently going for independent printing. So we have a small crowdfunder going with about 20 days left. I'll put just checking if I can put the link in the chat. I don't think I can. But if you go to Indiegogo and you type in 40 Children of Bhopal, you will find the project. And there are 3 options. So you can simply purchase the book, which can be shipped anywhere in the world. There's another option with an art pack, so a poster for your walls, and a few other bits. And the third option covers one of the questions that were in the chat. So the third option means you can buy a bundle of books that we can donate to libraries or community centers. That includes within Bhopal, but also other places in the world. And I'd be happy to hear suggestions of where those books should be as well. We've had a couple of those packs bought.
Terrific, thank you. So that's Indiegogo and search for 40 Children of Bhopal.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Savraj.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think with that, I'm going to close the webinar. Thank you so much, everybody who has attended. Thank you for your very insightful questions. And thank you so much to our panelists tonight. Good night. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.